Yeah, look, I can get rather passionate, so please don't take most of what I say as basically being given. I might get a bit passionate during the meeting. I don't know how this talk's going to go because my talks always basically just have a life of their own. So I like to follow serendipity in the way they go. If I do slip into making comments about the elephant in the room, and there's not Trump I'm talking about because I don't get into politics, please don't get me wrong. I've worked for big companies and I know their impetuses and their way they go about doing things. I'm not particularly interested in talking about individual products. I'm not a GIS person who does data. Yes, I'm a database expert. But I'm not a person who works as a scientist, works on an individual data set, works with a specific platform, qGIS or ArcGIS or whatever. I try to look at solutions and how to build solutions from the disparate parts that make up the wonderful world of our open source. So this talk is really about that. Yes, I'm a bloke, so therefore at the end I'm going to probably try to offer a solution. But it's not a solution. It's just me trying to basically make sense of the mayhem or the pieces that I see and suggesting a potential way forward. I suspect it will not get anywhere, but in the end that summary is just about trying to basically get the disparate parts and put it together in some sort of a way. I don't work for myself anymore, although this talk is a personal talk for me from nearly over 40 years' experience within the industry. I work for a small company and my comments, while some of my experience comes out of working for that company, my comments are not the comments of my company. Yes, I've worked out there, and I've worked in there, and now I live there, and in my own little hobbit hole. Yes, I work from home, and therefore I suffer from the problems of all of us who work from home. It's about isolation. And the problem with that is you can do a lot of reading. You have to read. But a lot of the problems you find is you sit on the outside looking in, and that's a little bit like what it's become like. I'm not an OSGeo person. I'm not an OGC person. Yes, I know what they do, but I can't hold all that detail together in my mind. I basically don't operate that way. So remember, I just live down the road, and this is where I am, and this is where my experience comes from. This is a thought bubble. Whether it goes anywhere is entirely up to you. What is the challenge that I'm basically going to try and talk about today? Challenges come from a bunch of things. Has anybody ever done a tender response? And nowadays you see this magic phrase coming, enterprise GIS. Well, I'm going to talk about that today and how we can envision that from an open source perspective. Have you ever tried to integrate an actual business system which actually has open source software in a platform operated by the biggest company in the world? They only want you to operate on their platform. This is not open. This is the problem we face. Try to run qGIS at a large council in this country, you'll find that you'll run up against the ire of the GIS department. Problems to do that. So what do we do if we're basically forced to get a system from outside and run it? Solutions architects from scratch. I've done quite a bit of that. And it's amazing how much pushback you get from the biggest company in the world's biggest supporters. So I've actually run with stuff where open source was the actual requirements of the actual the work I did with them. We sat down and tried to envisage a new world of open software with open source components. And to be frank, it was hard to put it together. And in the end, the person who was driving it left, and the lower life forms popped up and took over and imposed large amounts of cost on the business. So, and then I had little minor issues about Docker, but I probably won't talk about Docker today at all. What is enterprise GIS? Well, I went to ESRI's site, to their dictionary, and they said it's a geographic information system that read on the rest. A little bit self-referential, I thought. But I then went to a competitor, 3GIS, and they in the end had a similar sort of thing, not very diverse, not very wide, not very open, and still rather self-referential. But what is enterprise GIS for open source, for FOSS4G? How do we put it all together into an integrated solution that will live, breathe, and provide value? We have a Lego box. And you've all seen the components. You all probably work only on one component. Potentially, you're all qGIS people. You might, if you're lucky, go out into the field, which is a very limited area within the open source community. We certainly run around with our databases and all sorts of bits and pieces, but what we do is we have a bunch of software. It's just components. We then basically say, well, everything nowadays has to be written in Python. Oh, sorry. Oops, shouldn't have said that, should I? But we operate in bigger environments than just Python as a scripting language. We do operate just from JavaScript, which has also become fairly dominant. But again, we've got individual elements that are going to make up the solution. This has not come out very well, but that's effectively that myriad box called open data. If you don't like the data, create another standard. That's the way it normally works. And then we have all these basically tools that basically go to put up from the development perspective. My company uses a lot of those tools in our product. We then basically we gravitate up. We go to our local SDIs, our local state government SDIs, which it's great that they publish. It's just that sometimes it's a little bit flaky, which is a real problem. And then, of course, we can always go to the UN, who's always got a solution for everything, which is big everything. Now, is it just my spatial stuff? It's not just my spatial stuff. Sorry, that's what I should have said. You try to craft something in this company I went to. They were using two different forms of field, Fulcrum, Vivenza maps. There were two platforms, two sets of data, two sets of processes, and this was a tiny company. And then there was also ESRI's collector in it as well. It's a messy environment we work in. One of the problems you face, it's messy. Wish it wasn't messy, but it's messy. And usually when a company goes into a business who's got skill in a certain area, they will push for that technology to run, whether that's basically the elephant in the room or whether that's our elephant in the room. We still basically push for what we know and we respect and we have experience in. But what if there's a business system that's already independently spatial? I wrote one for a big council in Australia. It doesn't use the big enterprise software. It never did, it wasn't before. The new standard appeared, the enterprise standard was set, and all of a sudden all your open source goes out the window because you're not using the right platform. That's not open. It's not respectful. It's also not accessible, and it's also not cost effective. But it works if you're the big company who gets that in the first place. Our Lego box, I believe, needs to contain, it always does need to contain, far more than just our components. That's the reality you operate in if you try to basically build solutions. We have platforms, okay, and then we use those platforms to do what we want to do with our own software. So we knock our Docker images up and we can go to qGIS and get basically PostGIS down as an individual bit. There's other platforms like Activity and Flowable and those, the BPMN standards. Have you heard anybody using BPMN platforms and engines within a platform which you have to use to implement solutions? The reality is, it's there, and these things are important. Hibernate, JVMs, persistence engines, Azure Access, AWS with their basic approaches and ways. You've got to try and work out how to fit within this whole environment. The reality is, whether you like it or not, and I've been criticised for years and years and years for being the biggest Oracle Spatial promoter in Australia and the world, because I worked for them and I was an early adopter. I was never like that. I now basically do almost entirely PostGIS, but I'll give you a good example of what the problem implies. When I was doing Oracle Spatial and putting in councils, guess what councils have as their platform? Microsoft. Everything is Microsoft. SQL Server, virtualization, Exchange Server, Office, PowerPoint. This talk was actually given using LibreOffice, but I had to make it into a PowerPoint to actually run. Open source, wonderful, isn't it? So the reality is, and when we had an Oracle database, it was the only thing that did spatial. We had one Oracle database, a sea of SQL Server. So finally, when SQL Server went spatial, I came to him and said, what should we do, Simon? And I said, go SQL Server. Integrate, 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 generate value, get other people to do your work for you. Do the backups, do the security, do the single point of login, all those good things that make an integrated solution work. So these things are out there and you have to work with them. Right? Then there's web services. How many of us basically use Bing Maps or anything else with them? right? Our product goes out there with a whole bunch of open Google Maps, all sorts of other things. Google Maps did for us what we could never do as spatial people. It actually helped people answer the question that people ask my wife, what does your husband do? When Google Maps came out, she said, Google Maps. And they went, oh yeah, I know what he does. But we have to integrate with that stuff, and we do it now. Yes, and the big elephant, we have to work with there's ReactJS stuff as well. All this stuff's out there that we have to integrate with. How do you put it together? So now our Lego box is looking even bigger, right? But it still only contains components. So the issues are the sorts of things I've been saying. Standards compliant, yes, but not just your standards. Not just the OGC standards. Not just the ISO standards. You know, the lack of basically willingness, or perhaps, not even perhaps it's willingness, it's the fact that we basically live in a fairly small world, we have limited resources, and we have to compartmentalize what we actually do. So when we can think about what we do to create a standard, it's too hard to look at what everybody else is doing. And in always those situations, what everybody else is doing have their own drive. They're being driven to do what they do and their deadlines and timelines. Trying to cross-link and integrate into a community is really, really hard, and therefore that drives the individualization of standards. We get multiple implementations. I'll give an example. Who uses qGIS? Yes. Who uses plugins? How many plugins are there? How many plugins do the same thing? Right, okay. Cross-component versions, if you're using those components, and they update them in different ways, how do you actually coordinate and manage all those? You can build a solution with open source software. You can convince a council to buy your stuff, install qGIS, LTE version, whatever, and you find somebody who will update it. Somebody will upgrade it outside of the solution you've got. And all of a sudden, support calls come in. It's a bit like trying to do Internet Explorer development, if you've ever tried to do it. Steve, remember that? And they'd release a patch, and it would stop the system from working. You know, the version control management is a problem. Support training and help desk. I'll say one thing about the big elephant in the room. It does support training and help desk really, really, really well. Hats off to them for doing it. How do we do that, basically, when our solution is all these bits and pieces? How do we provide that integrated solution? We have missing components, basically, within it. It's all very well, basically, putting PostGIS in because you can do PG routing. But again, if you're the only person in the room with SQL Server, why can't we run it on SQL Server? Because we're self-referential. We tend to put everything within our own frameworks. We need PostGIS. Commercial open integration is also basically hard, but the reality is you've got to actually look at it and try and do it. So how do you go from there to there? They always say the old proverb, I'll throw it out, I'm not big on these sorts of things, but it does take a village to raise a child in a sense. So we've got to identify what's missing. We bite off small chunks, look at individual components, maybe look at routing, maybe look at version management, which is not done very well at all within the open source community. Try and divide and conquer what we've got. Can we embrace and extend successful projects, find out if somebody's doing it, they're prepared to share their knowledge on how they got around the issues that you found. This isolation, which is driven also, I find, is the metaphor for me working from home is the sense the metaphor about how we then actually don't really operate well as a community, helping and sharing each other out. So I pulled these couple off the web, GeoNode, but that's nice. It's a nice little solution. The Intersect people put up this nice little solution. Again, very self-referential, but at least it's successful and you can look at it and see how I can learn from it. Can we bottle existing experience? Can we share that? How do we pull these things together so we can basically share from experience and say, well, I did it, and I did this. This is the problems I faced. When I did this, this is what this happened here. We can go to forums, but forums are Q&A sessions. A lot of forums are probably going to find their click rates are dropping down because people go to ChatGPT and says, how do I do this? And you get a simple answer. Question and answer stuff are they're very individual, very, very good. It's like looking at a grain of sand when you're trying to actually create a complete solution. The impediments, of course, are enormous, and I've alluded to pretty well all of them as I've gone through this talk so far. But in a sense, I've put up a definition of what I think enterprise GIS should be. It's a set of supported version control components, both internal and external to the business, right? That are implemented with common standards and create a unified platform with access for all. So if somebody comes in, a department in your business buys a software, buys an asset management system. If we could ever get an asset management system that actually manages its own spatial data rather than going for plugins for vendors and things. But if they came in and said, this is basically how we do spatial, we should be able to embrace and extend that. We should be able to provide a platform in which those people can feel comfortable, and we can feel comfortable that they're basically providing a cost-effective solution, working within the team environment, and adding value. So elements of success, again, integration, common platforms, OGC services are past things. It's nice to say one of the things I was going to suggest as a solution here was this idea that we certify what's certified. So we can go along and say this is OGC, basically web processing server version 2 compliant, but how do you then mix it with something else that's not? So as a complete solution, how do you basically validate and enable those things to come together as a whole? Maybe we certify the certified. Maybe we say this is the solution goes out, this is our version, it's using version X of X, version of X of Y, version of Y, and we have validated that it actually does all of that. So that leads on to the idea of an instruction template, a set of instructions for how to go from the Lego blocks to the actual the house itself. The idea of a template. Some people in IT for small things call design patterns. My idea of a solution would be the idea of a template. The idea that you basically, a template is a predefined resource that serves slightly more than a guide for creating a solution. It's got to be slightly more, but it isn't the solution. It's only the suggested solution. And after this talk's gone, that'll be it. It'll be just forgotten about. That's the way it normally goes. Oh, why were these dots appearing? Oh, how painful. This is the Microsoft PowerPoint conversion. It's not supposed to do that. And I didn't bother to check the PowerPoint conversion from LibreOffice. So I'm sorry for that. Templates should be formal, but not prescriptive. I should be able to go along and say, hey, have you got a template for doing this? Oh, yeah, somebody says, I've got a Docker image that does that. Yeah, but I want my Docker image, basically, that governs a PostGIS to work with GeoServer, to work with my PHP app, to work with this. What? Hey, how does it work? This is what I'm trying to do as a solution. Don't just give me the components, but try and give me a template. Try and guide me a bit more. Try and give me more to help me craft that solution. So in summary, we need a driver, I believe, some sort of integrated vision, which is more than just pieces of software, right? Or standards definition, individual components. Do we need a new style of open systems intellectual frameworks? Not just software frameworks, not just, hey, I'm on the qGIS team and I develop widget X. But basically, I'm on a team of people who says, hey, how can we put all the components together to form the solution? I think the idea of a templated system might be a solution to it. Again, it's a very masculine way of doing things. Give me a problem, I'll tell you what the solution is. It's not. It's just me thinking out loud. It's me trying to say, how do we put this stuff together? You know, how do we make it sensible, rational, supportable, maintainable, and to provide us some measure of saying, yes, we have an enterprise solution for open source software. Our vision is bigger and deeper and wider, but that's hard. And if my talk says anything else today, I can tell you it's hard putting it together as solutions. Will this idea have legs? Probably not. The last pitch is I'm going to say this is the company I actually work for. It's a company called Koga. And this is the way we do open source in a solution that they offer. It's not perfect because basically in the end I'll say that it is still our solution. It is still what we basically, this is our platform. It's still not a complete platform, a whole platform. But it is something that actually has provided also vision. We use all of those components. Without those components, we wouldn't have a business. We will use any database whatsoever that has spatial in it. We don't basically dictate what spatial database you use. We don't dictate what ordinary database you use. We use GeoServer for those people who do, because basically so much of the stuff is pushed that way that it's become an open standard, sort of. Well, it's a required standard. And basically we have lots of plugins for those enterprise systems, because that's what you've got to do if you build a solution within. So this is not a business system. It's basically a visualization platform, I guess. Maybe ArcGIS Online, something like that you might think of. But it doesn't basically dictate whatever they do. And we use an awful lot of other open source software. Like I use LibreOffice today to create my PowerPoint. We use lots of other things. And the big interesting thing, we're working with OSGI. The big things we're basically doing is we've integrated into our system a BPMN engine. So now we can basically create models, runnable models, by actually working with customers to determine their business processes, validate the model using open standards, then drop it into our engine, and then we can run it. A little bit, think of it as sort of as like a mini FME within your application. And that's what BPMN has the power to be able to do. When we finally get to things like WPS servers, when they finally start to become out there, plugging it in for us will be fairly straightforward. But again, does this fit within my enterprise solution? Yes and no. I'm not saying it does, I'm not saying it doesn't. This is just the way we've tried to make sense of the wonderful world in which we work, with these wonderful basic bits of software that we use every day. And this is, I think, how potentially we need to look towards putting it all together. Thank you.
We'll stay behind the microphone.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think we have time for one or two quick questions. I have a question, if no one else. Oh, here we go.
Hi, Simon. Just wondering what's next for you. What's the next really big thing that you want to work on?
I'm flat out in two very, 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 very intense contracts. I couldn't come to the conference. I only get together, so I'm not really related. I'm flat out basically building. We have a fight on with one of the biggest councils in Australia. The information system I built for them, which has been going for 5 to 10 years, is built basically entirely to do basically the business system that is actually required. It actually aligns totally with the business requirements of the department. The GIS people say, no, it's got spatial, it's got to be done as an ESRI geo database. And they've never bothered to come on and talk to me. Never. Ever. So the fight, I'm getting old. I've been in this industry over 40 years, and I've tried to do, my geomatics degree is my first and premier degree. It's a great love of my life, but the second love of my life was IT computing science, and I spent my whole life trying to integrate computing science and IT. I suspect I'm the person in the room who is on the outlier in such conferences as this, and that's what I've generally found in GIS. I do what I do. I've backed off. I basically now just provide services. I work for this company. I'm just building an enterprise database, call it that. Sorry, I'm building a business database for a specific section, Aboriginal heritage system. Our company does Aboriginal heritage, so it's one of those like business systems. We use open source software in those business systems. Those solutions currently run in 4 states of the Commonwealth, and we're now implementing it in the 5th. The fight for us is when we're doing open source, we will hit the problem again with the big elephant in the room. So I just do what I can do locally. If anybody wants to talk to me about the idea of seeing if this thing could have some sort of legs, I'm not a marketing person. I'm a very intense, Aspergy sort of a guy. I'm a solutions guy. I'm not a marketing guy. I'm not a people person. I don't know that. So, sorry I can't give an answer to the question. When I was a consultant, I would have said, yes, come and talk to me. But I've basically backed off, and I'm just doing my bit to try and build information systems that actually do what customers want, not what is dictated by an open source platform or another big platform. So I just do my bit best I can. Not very well.
Cool. Thank you very much. So I don't think we have time for a question. So please find Simon if you want to chat, because I have the microphone. I'm going to say something.
Yeah, I'll just say I have to go back to work just basically. I've just thrown a big database over the cliff to my developers on AWS, and I suspect I might get a few questions this afternoon. I'll hang around afterwards for basically lunch. I'll sit outside on the table if anybody wishes to come and chat to me. You're perfectly welcome. And
Amazing. Thank you.